Definitely have a classic for you today. First, I'm going to have a talk with noted Jamaican entertainment attorney. In fact, he is one of the creators of the original Musically Speaking at another place. And he's online, and we're going to be talking about intellectual property and how do you protect intellectual property. Talking about Lloyd Stanbury. I mean, when we did Musically Speaking, it was like 30 years ago. I was a teenager then. I don't know how old Lloyd was, but that is the story as it is. And telling you, when you really talk about some great days on Musically Speaking, we had them. But hear me, Lloyd, we're going to have a serious discussion today on how do we protect intellectual property and how important is intellectual property. Musically Speaking, Kevin Williams is at the control. Danelia Doyle is here, my producer. And, my sister, what I call a rat bat. She's here, Shireen. We just made it into Jamaica. I mean, right on the button. Musically Speaking, that's the program because today is going to be special. Later on, I'm talking to none other than the great Jackie Jackson. Believe me, it's going to be special. Tiger. Now, that song was produced by an entity with which I've been affiliated, the famed Shocking Vibes. And the man online here with me, co-hosting, Lloyd Stanbury, he has an affiliation with this artist. Lloyd, tell me a little bit about your association with Tiger. Good afternoon, sir.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Um, Before I start today, Clyde, I I'm not sure if the news that I'm hearing is correct about Noel Brownie. Have you?
Yes, I heard.
Yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a shock,
Yes, it's it it
okay?
it,
Because
it
I was very close to that family.
yeah, well, with Steely and Clevie and
Yeah,
yes,
and
because
I mean we lost Dalton what, a year ago,
yes.
or just around, and I just couldn't believe what I saw this morning. So I'd like to send my condolences to the Brownie family.
Yeah, Andy
Yeah.
Green put up a post this morning. I was in Florida when I saw the post, and she was saying that Noel had passed. Noel worked with me. I remember on a particular project in the Cayman, where one of my friends was producing some stuff with his wife, and Noel and his musical gifts were more than helpful in that project. So we want
Mhm.
to really say our deepest sympathies to the Brownie family and to the music family in general, but to the
Yes,
Brownie,
yes,
a
yes.
great Jamaican music family. So Noel Brownie, yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I couldn't go forward without
No, I appreciate it, sir.
saying that. So yes, Tiger.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
you
so
said tiger,
I
tiger. No, what? So why tiger, tiger? Is it tiger, tiger burning bright?
because there's no other artist like Tiger. It's as simple as that. It's there's no one that I've seen, heard, or been associated with that could compare, to Mr. Jackson.
What? No, what do you mean by that, Lloyd? I mean, what makes
I
him so
mean,
incomparable?
in particular,
Because you used to manage
his
him,
performance.
right?
Yeah,
But
I was his manager
so
for a
so so
while.
so
Yes.
you have to concede your personal bias.
Well, I do have a personal bias, yes, but anyone who saw Tiger perform would agree with me. There's no one else. He's like a real cat
No,
on the stage.
I remember that you remember that performance, Lloyd, that he did at Reggae Bash.
Yes.
And when he came out and said, "I don't seek, you don't know him there," and the crowd was looking for Tiger, and Tiger was in the crowd, and he was saying, "I don't seek, you don't know him there." Huh? And then he just jump on the scene, whop whop whop.
Oh man, amazing.
No, he was energetic. You really can't say otherwise. But let me ask you a question, Lloyd, because Tiger seemed to have been a handful in.
Yeah. I mean, I've found in my experience that most artists who are super talented, are challenging, to interact with. That has been my experience.
Okay.
Super talented people tend to, be, as I said, challenging to interact with them. And I guess that's why they are super talented. Their brain functions right. Their brain functions in a way that's different from ours.
Yeah, genius has its own problems.
Which is why we can't do what they do.
They live in a different world. But I asked this question because Tiger was signed to a major label. Was it Columbia at the time when?
Yes. They had a sub label called Chaos.
Yeah, Chaos. Yes.
Right. Yeah. So he was signed to that label, and he was signed at the time when there were a number of Jamaican artists who were signed under the Sony banner. Quite a few.
Oh yes,
around that time.
Yes, it was in the days when the great Maxine Store was with Columbia.
Yes, Maxine Store was with Columbia then, and she was instrumental in having a number of the artists signed. Supercat was signed, and that was a part of that arrangement as well, because I was working with Robert Livingston at the time, who was managing Supercat.
Diana King.
There was a Specs Shang label.
Oh yes, with Specialist and Minister Grange.
Yeah, Specialist and Minister Grange, and they had a group of artists.
Well, Shaban Patra.
Also Shabra Patra.
There was Richie Stevens. Yeah.
Mad Cobra.
Yes.
I think Bounty Killer too. There were a number of artists under the Specs Shang label who got signed. So that was at a time when Jamaican music was really the music that was sought after by the labels in North America.
There is a whole analysis that could be done on that period as to why it did not bring the results that we were expecting. But that's for another discussion. You and I will have that because...
Yeah. I don't know if it never brought the results we were expecting, because we had some super hits around that time. Diana King, Ainika Mosey, Cobra. We had songs that were topping the national charts in the United States.
Yeah, but even so, there was disappointment, because what seemed to have happened is that the record labels seemed to have decided one night that they were going to dump everybody, and all of a sudden, nobody was signed to the label almost.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. Some kind of analysis needs to be done.
No, and they're
to understand what happened.
Yeah, I mean, there clearly something went wrong, and I mean, there has been a lot of, finger pointing and people blaming who and why not. But I think it's deserving of some deeper analysis. But that's as we said, that's another program that we should talk about, because we're talking today primarily about IP and how do we protect intellectual property. You've spent, your entire adult life dealing with the protection of intellectual property, and you have been at times very annoyed because you don't think that Jamaica has been paying sufficient attention to the protection of intellectual property, or that the players here do not have the requisite respect for intellectual property. Am I correct in my capturing of your views?
Yes, I would agree with that. And I think it's something that runs across the board. It's not just the creators who have contributed to this, what I see as a problem, but also the users, including the government. So if you have an environment where even government institutions do not respect intellectual property, then you're not setting the table for, you know, the proper commercial exploitation of
No,
people's
no, no. I'm gonna have
commercial
to press you on this, Lloyd, because
creative output.
you are accusing the government, the state, of not showing the requisite respect to intellectual property. You want to, I mean, without being too specific, you want to tell me clearly what you're talking about?
How can I do it clearly without being specific?
No, no, you
But
don't have to.
I've come across. Let me just give you an example without calling any names. I've come across cases where government entities have used people's music without their permission
Mhm.
in advertising.
And you
And
know
that's what
that
I'm
for a
referring
fact
to.
that has happened. And you have had cases where you.
For an absolute fact. I'm currently involved in such a case
Where the
where a government agency used someone's music without even contacting the person
that sound like
in
a
an
lot. That
advertising.
sound like a lawsuit you're working on there, Lloyd.
Well, it
Well,
doesn't have to be a lawsuit
it can be a
because
settlement.
you should have settled. So we have, and it has happened more than once. So I'm just saying that if government agencies don't set the example by respecting the rights of creators, then we have a real problem.
Yeah, but
So it runs across the board.
let me
It's not
ask you.
just the yeah. Go ahead.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think this is born out of ignorance or arrogance?
I think it is mostly out of ignorance. We talk a lot about intellectual property and we talk a lot about creative industries at the governmental level. And don't get me wrong, some positive actions have been taken by the government, in terms of, putting in place a copyright law that is a fairly good one that has existed or that was modified from back in 1993, I think it was, but still does need, more updating. So it's not that the government hasn't done its part in terms of putting in place a law and trying to provide opportunities for public discussion and information dissemination to the general public and establishing the Jamaican Intellectual Property Office, JIPO. All of those things are positive moves by the government, and we should commend the government for doing that. But at the same time, there are agencies within government who, I would say, out of ignorance, abuse people's rights.
But
And that should not happen. An example should be set by the state and state agencies.
what I
so
hear
that, yeah.
what I hear you talking about, Lloyd, what I hear you talking about is a case or cases in which individual agents of the state might have run amok. And it's not a question of a policy collapse or failure on the part of government. Am I correct in saying that?
You are correct. Yeah. But to have agencies of government displaying that level of ignorance, that to me is a big problem.
Mm-hmm. No.
So we need to address public education at all levels. People are more aware of what intellectual property rights are all about, what they mean, and what we should do to respect them. And the government should set an example by ensuring that the agencies that utilize people's works, do so in an appropriate way. Yeah, I think that is a necessary ingredient to developing a culture of respect for IP. But it's not just the government. No, I don't want to spend the whole time bashing the government.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
I want.
I don't want the sister in Babsy to get on my case because she tends to think that I'm always bashing the government, and that
Oh
is not
my, and
so.
I don't want to get caught in that.
Yes,
I don't want to
the
get caught
government
in that.
has done a good amount of positive things to create an environment where our intellectual property rights are treated more appropriately.
All right, let me
Yeah.
ask you. Let me ask you a quick one. The extension of the copyright for creation after the creators have passed. I mean, Jamaica did a kind of different little thing, and we added a few more years. And I think the minister was not in favor at the time when the extension was done. It was from what 45? What was it, Lloyd?
50 years.
50 years,
50 years after. 50
after
years
death, yes, and then we moved
the
it towards
passing of the rights holder.
yeah, the rights holder, yeah, and we moved it up. There are some people who had some concern. I think the minister might have had some concern at the time, in that.
I am one of those persons who had some concern and still have concerns about, us in Jamaica extending the
While
rights.
others are not doing it, because you need
Exactly.
you need some kind of balance, reciprocity.
Right, because if in Jamaica we are extending the rights to 95, 100, or whatever it might want to be, years after the death of the creator. And in other countries, people are still at 50, or they may have extended it to a little bit more than 50. What that does is places Jamaica in a disadvantageous position, because persons can pursue inside of Jamaica rights
That they
for a
can't
much longer period of time than we can pursue in their country.
in their territory. So
Right, which puts us at a
in an
disadvantage.
invidious position, because it's very important for us to understand, after a creator dies, there is a certain period beyond that person's death, 50 years, and in Jamaica it's longer than that, where the person's estate can benefit from it's as if,
Right.
it's almost as if the person still exists. So for that
Right.
period of time, the family members can benefit, right?
Right.
And they own the
Right.
rights basically to that.
Right.
Because just like you would transfer any other property, intellectual property.
exactly.
So, but that has
Right.
that has a life, and so that's important. So Lloyd, I mean, you have voiced your concern, and it's a concern that I share. That just this unilateral extension is problematic. But I think none of the Jamaican songwriters might be crying over it, I suppose. I don't know. But I mean, when you look, because you have to look at the bigger picture and what we're paying out as a country, because I think we're still paying out more than we're getting in for these songs and these rights, and for public performance and all of those things, right? So we have to be very careful how we manage these rights issues, because they can get out of hand. So that's a very important part of the discussion, Lloyd. One of the things I want to discuss with you, and maybe we should start that after the break, is the whole question of the distinction between copyright and trademarking, because both of them, I think, are very important to the music industry in their own way.
Yes.
Right? But I think what is happening is that people are a little confused as to how they are to be used. And I want to discuss maybe an old case with you, and some of the challenges in terms of even partnership agreements, how groups, for example, vocal groups and bands should structure themselves in terms of ownership, because that's a critical part of intellectual property which I don't think many people appreciate. And
Absolutely. Yeah.
and many times you have these disillusion of bands and groups. I mean, most famously the Beatles, the Wailers, and you can call
And
so
you
many.
don't know who owns the name,
You know, right? Who owns the name? Who owns the marks? Right?
who
Because
owns the mark, right?
if the thing is properly configured, if we're dealing with it properly, then the disillusion sometimes might not be as traumatic, because you might leave
Yes,
a group and you're still earning some money from the group dependent on how it's structured. So I think that's a very
exactly.
important part of the business that we need to talk about, Lloyd. Tiger. Musically speaking, that's the program. Co-hosting with me, a man who was there from the beginning, Lloyd Stanbury, attorney at law, entertainment consultant, author. Lloyd, there's so much other things I could say. Father, grandfather too. Husband. Yes. But Lloyd, one of the challenges that we have in terms of protecting intellectual property is the whole question of how do we manage trademarks and names of groups and other related uh, facts. So, for example, many times you have vocal groups touring Jamaica or going around the world, and the relationship that those people currently in the group have to the original people who sang those tunes is non-existent. And that is as a result of people not properly protecting names. Uh, I think we could look at the Bob Marley situation, and that, as it relates to Peter Tosh and Bunny Wailer, is a classic one of failure to deal with intellectual property in an effective and appropriate manner. Because, I mean, to this day, you have people associated with Bunny Wailer who will contend that they were not treated properly by Blackwell and Island and Bob Marley, because they thought that, this is a group, and whatever accrues to one should have accrued to everyone. Lloyd, I want us to talk about the whole question of partnership agreements and how do we protect group identity and group names. Please.
Yes. Well, one of the first, issues that I encountered legally, as a young attorney was Black Uhuru.
That was a big one, because I mean
You know,
Michael and Ducky were fighting over the name of the group.
exactly, exactly. And I got involved then when the group was still together, and I made a suggestion that they should put in place a group agreement, which is the kind of thing you're referring to. That's the way to address the issue of ownership of brands, marks, names, and so on. An appropriate agreement between the members of the group would address, who owns this brand that we are creating, whether it be Black Uhuru, whether it be Whalers, whether it be Scatolites. I just throw those three out there,
Because there are three
because
problematic ones.
there are three major names in our music industry that have all had problems surrounding them, and it is because the members of those groups did not put in place a group agreement or a partnership agreement, as you referred to it. Because in an appropriate agreement, they would have set, outlined,
The parameters.
we're trading under this name, and who owns the name. And there's nothing wrong with saying John, who is one person in the group, owns the name. There's nothing wrong with saying that if that is the case. And you could also say that the name is owned equally by all the members of the group. But it gives you the opportunity to address the ownership of that name and that brand that can become a registrable trademark.
Yeah, because the trademark is very important, because with the agreement, the trademark would come because it would prevent other people from using that name that you've agreed on.
Exactly. So the first thing you would do in the agreement is establish who owns this name, which will become the brand, the mark that you're registering, and then you register it, so that it is protected. So we have had issues with copyright, but we have had a lot more issues maybe with trademark and managing our trademarks and our names and our brands, because most times no attention is placed on putting in place the appropriate protective mechanisms, so that we do not have problems in the future. One of the ones that really kind of hurts me the most is the scatterlights.
You want to expand on that?
Because the scatterlights represents such a big part of Jamaica's musical history.
I was just with one of my cousins, Trevor Thompson, who is part of the current Scatterlights over the weekend, and the Scatterlights is really a seminal group in terms of music in Jamaica. I mean, some of the greatest musicians ever assembled. But I think, there might be issues of ownership, and nobody is sure
of the name Scatterlights.
The name Scatterlights, and nobody is sure of that. And that would go down to another thing which I'd want to bring up later, Lloyd, because we're talking about intellectual property, and this aspect of it might not be something you can register per se, but when you look at the idea of ska and the fact that many people do not think or would not ascribe ska to Jamaica, that's a problem. You have many, many, many bands out there playing ska, and the members are totally oblivious of the origins of ska, because for them it is just perhaps a North American music form. That to me is an intellectual property issue too, because you're talking about now, that is you appropriate a whole genre, not a song we're talking about here now. We're talking about a genre, and that to me is a serious issue. But just looking back now at the Scatterlights and the fact that there is no proper protection for the name, there is no clear idea as to the ownership, as far as I understand. That to me is so sad. But then the Scatterlights in its original iteration maybe lasted a few months, and from the very beginning it was a group that was plagued with issues. One of the things I can remember, well, not remember, but I know of, is in 1964, when the mission was going to the World Fair at Flushing Meadows, where now they play tennis. What was happening was that Mr. Siaga selected Byron Lee and the Dragonaires to go there and play ska over the Scatterlights, and that was considered a major problem. But one of the issues at the time was that people were saying that the Scatterlights were not disciplined people. They were great and brilliant, but they were not disciplined. Now, I think I mean, I see some real professionalism in the Scatterlights. No, I mean, I just saw them at Rotterdam, and I mean, they were brilliant. I mean, and I say my bias because my cousin Trevor is there, but as a drummer, but I'm just saying that one of the things is that the Scatterlights has been plagued with a lot of issues since the inception, and again, it might be what you talked about at the very beginning, the brilliance of these men, because I mean, the gifts of these men are unquestionable, but there were problems, and I think we need to explore this issue more seriously because many great groups, I mean, Third World is just one of them too. Um, they break up, and what is it? Do those that leave the group, do they have any continued interest in the group, or is it that, I mean, you leave the group and that's it, or do you get a buyout? Now all of these things can be addressed if you have the proper agreement, right, Lloyd?
Absolutely, absolutely. But we have a tendency um, not to want to sign documents, and um, it is always to our detriment. I don't know where it's coming from, but I'm even more worried today than I was 10, 15 years ago, because what I've witnessed is that the newer artists are even less interested.
Really?
Yes, I've the newer producers and artists. When I say the newer ones, I mean the very new ones, particularly those who are in dancehall music, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
or trap, or the new iterations of Jamaican music forms. They seem not to have any interest whatsoever in documentation, more so than was happening, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, we are coming from a time 30, 40, 50 years ago when, paperwork was almost non-existent, with the exception of, some documents that Mr. Dodd ensured that people signed, that they didn't realize they were signing. They thought it was those receipts for lunch money, but they were sometimes signing actual agreements that assigned their rights to Mr. Dodd. So we moved from that period to a period where people became more aware, and people were getting into contracts and so on. But from my experience in today's world of Jamaican music, the young dancehall producers in particular, they're not signing any papers with the artists that they work with.
Yeah, but
And they are producing a phenomenal amount of music.
yeah, but let me ask you a question, Lloyd. Can that be? It's a cultural issue.
Mm-hmm.
I would think, but you think that could be a function sometimes of not having management play as active a role in the career of the artist as they should? Because, for example, I know you go into a studio and the simple issue of splits, who
Mm-hmm.
should get what for the composition and the creation of a song. And 6, 7 years, and it's only after the song has become a hit that people now
Mm-hmm.
start arguing about,
Squabbling about it, yeah.
and then people's memories would have changed and been altered because I
Yeah,
mean, if the song is a big hit, I am going. If I had a line in the song, no, I have 10.
yeah,
And it's not because I am a cheat, but it is
yeah,
because my memory is going to be altered based on the fact that I see something happening there, and it's just natural. And
yeah.
I think if the artist would allow management to intervene, because you and your brethren do some tune and thing, you might feel a way if you say, well, you go and get 15% and I get 10, and it's me write this, which would have been the best thing to do because
Yes.
everybody's fresh in their mind what is
Mm-hmm.
happening. But then you have
Mm-hmm.
a situation where you wait 6 years, and sometimes I mean, it might be years after that sometimes you know who wrote the song or who owns the song. Or
Mm-hmm.
Carolina is is one of those cases where Buster, the producer, was contending that he wrote the song, and then the Folks Brothers were contending that they wrote the song after Shaggy made a big hit of the thing. Well,
Mm-hmm.
it was settled in the Folk Brothers' favor in London, of all places. It's a Jamaican
Mm-hmm.
music situation, but it was settled in London because I suppose that's where the money is. And
Mm-hmm.
we had that situation. And there are many others because we don't settle the situation right at point.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think what is happening, Clyde, is that we produce a lot of music. Jamaica produces a lot of music. So to manage that output, we need to be producing a lot of, music managers, artist managers.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the rate at which we make and produce music, we're not keeping up in terms of equipping persons to provide the representational support that the artists and the producers need.
But good,
Because
you know,
our output is phenomenal. But what are we doing to generate a steady flow of knowledgeable management representatives to function in that environment where we are making so much music
so
that
you're
needs
so
representation?
you're saying that the problem in terms of protection of intellectual property could be the result of a crisis in management. Is that what you're saying?
It has always been, just as you pointed out, if the artists had good representation and they listened to the representation, these problems would have been solved by addressing them at the early stage, which is when it should be done. A lot of persons who are out there holding themselves out as managers, they know a little bit more than the artists, but not enough, not enough to guide the artist appropriately. And it is because we have, and don't get me wrong,
No, because
we have we have come a
I want to
long
ask
way.
a question because is it that
Yeah, go ahead.
people like Stanbury is taking out a role for themselves? So, well, you know, because we are the guys who really have the thing and them boys that are along the road don't really know what go on. Tell me what we need in terms of knowledge, in terms of preparation for management to protect these intellectual property assets.
Well, the managers need to understand what IP, intellectual property, means. Yeah, there's a basic ingredient, I would think, for a manager. You need to understand what copyright means and what you need to do to protect someone's copyrights. You need to understand what trademarks are and what you need to do to protect trademarks and names and brands and so on. And you need to understand how these relationships are governed, the relationship between the artist and his manager to begin with, the relationship between the artist and the producer, the relationship between the producer and the distributor of the music. Yeah. All of these relationships are governed by contracts. Yes. So a good manager needs to understand those basic things and need to be equipped to guide the artist appropriately. To say, well, you're a songwriter. These are the things that you need to do when your song is being recorded. This is what you need to do to protect the songs at a certain level in terms of registering, becoming a member of the societies that represent songwriters. So we need to have persons in management positions who understand those basic things, copyright, trademarks, contracts. Or they don't have to be lawyers, but they need to know that these um, are
Essential
activities
parts.
or processes that you need to engage to ensure that the artist protects his or her work, and you don't have confusion down the road. Yes, and the manager has to know those things, and we're not producing enough persons who understand those basic things so that they can properly represent the volume of musical output that is coming from Jamaica. It's a tremendous amount. Everybody's a producer, and every man in Jamaica is an artist.
But yeah,
the postman of a cassette, the gardener of a cassette. Every man in Jamaica have a cassette with his recordings, and he's just waiting to bust. Every man in Jamaica is an artist and woman.
No, but the problem is that with intellectual property, it is intangible, and so a lot of people don't attach a lot of value to it, and people don't know that, is my pension that sometimes, because after a while it might be the only thing that you have if you're a songwriter. A lot of times, Lloyd, you hear people complaining that their songs are used on political platforms, for example, and in political campaigns. And I want to perhaps make a distinction between the use in political campaigns and the use on political platforms, because sometimes artists become upset saying that their work is being used inappropriately because it's on a political platform and they don't like it. Or sometimes you hear that people's songs are used. Eddie Grant's song was used, I think, in the Trump campaign, and Eddie was not amused by the whole thing, and he asked for a cease and desist. I don't understand how it would have been able to be used legitimately without consulting Eddie or his publishers, but that's another matter. But artists sometimes they complain about their work being used on political platform, and I would want us to talk about whether it is illegitimate to be using my song on a political platform or in a political campaign. Let's discuss that, Lloyd.
Well, I mean, it depends on first of all, the song has an owner, and also the recording has an owner.
That's important, because because the ownership of the distinction between the ownership of the song as opposed to the ownership of the recording, because many people conflate the two and tell you, and they really don't know. So I think we should talk about that.
Yeah. So the way I usually, try to explain it in a simple way is that there is only one song called Yesterday. That was Beatles, right?
The Beatles, yes.
But there are many recordings of Yesterday.
Yes.
There's only one song called Yesterday. There's only one song called White Christmas.
Yes.
But there are many, many recordings of White Christmas.
Yes.
And every recording of White Christmas is owned by a different person. It's owned by the person who recorded it.
Yeah, the producer.
There's only one person owns the song White Christmas.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's a difference between the song and the recording. Yeah, and as you say, people confuse those two issues, and it is the source of a lot of, misunderstandings and confrontations, because there's not that clarity. Yeah. So we need to start from right there, establishing that the song is a distinct and separate property.
It's a distinct and separate entity from the recording. And the composer songwriters, they derive the benefit from their songwriting, while the producer, he owns the master, as they call it, the recording.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Now,
and you can have several recordings of the same song.
Yes. No,
Yeah. But what I was getting at though is that it depends on what is being used
and how it is being used.
and how it is being used. And if because it is owned, because this song is owned by someone and the recording is owned by someone, just like any other property. You know, a man cannot just walk through my yard every morning.
You would have to explain to you why, or you'd
Because
have to give the
my
right.
yard is my property,
Yes.
exactly. The same way that someone can't just walk through your yard every day without you giving him permission. Someone can't just get up and use your song. It's your property. Someone can't get up and just use your recording, regardless of how they're using it. And there are some exceptions under the copyright law, you know, news and educational purposes and so on.
And
Typically, those are
public performances where there's a blanket license. So, for
Exactly,
example,
yeah.
if I'm a sound system and I get a blanket license, which if you're playing music, people's music in public, you need to go and do your registration.
Exactly.
Sound system man, club operators, once you play
Radio station or whatever,
station, because then you get what is called a blanket license, so you don't have to go every day and find
each person.
each person, because these societies ensure that they issue licenses broadly, so that
Right.
that's important. And Lloyd, well, when we come back, it's a different discussion now, because we're going to bring in Jackie Jackson. It's a different discussion.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
So we're going to talk a little bit. No, when we come back, we're going to be doing a little bit of history lesson with the great Jackie, talking about some of the great things that happened in Jamaican music, especially in the rocksteady era, in which he played such a significant role.
Greetings, this is the artist M. Bridge 99 FM, from Jamaica to the Caribbean diaspora, to the world. Keep it locked.